Blog Talk Radio.
This is the News in 10, an international affairs program from Bostonred. It's part of our family, and we have been pursuing it. It's a slow go, but nonetheless, we are going, as the late Lyndon Johnson would say, so we are here. We'll start with an interview from Le Figaro, the French newspaper. They interviewed the Syrian leader Bachar el-Assad. And actually they have it as el-Assad, al-Assad, seen it written as that. But nonetheless, this is the interview. It was conducted in Damascus by Georges Malbrunot. I'm butchering the French name, but nonetheless, we were there. A question from Le Figaro. Can you prove to us that your army did not use chemical weapons on 21 August in the Damascus suburb during an attack that killed more than 1,000 people, as you accused by President Obama and the French President François Hollande, President Assad? It is for those who are making the accusations to provide the proof. We have charged the U.S. and France to put forward a single proof. Obama and Hollande have been unable to do so, even to their own people. I am not at all suggesting that the Syrian army does or does not possess such weapons. Let's suppose that our armies wish to use WMDs. It's really going to do so in the area where it is actually present and where soldiers have been wounded by these weapons, as the UN inspectors found during their visits to hospitals where they were being treated. Where is the logic in that? What would your response be in the case of military strikes against Syria? The Mideast is a powder keg, and today the flame is coming very near. We cannot talk merely about Syria's response, but about what might take place after the first strike. But no one knows what will happen. Everyone will lose control of the situation when the powder keg explodes. Chaos and extremism will spread. There's a risk of a regional war. Has France become an enemy of Syria? Whoever contributes to the terrorist financial and military strengthening is an enemy of the Syrian people. Whoever works against the interests of Syria and its citizens is an enemy. The French people is not an enemy, but the policies of its state is hostile to the Syrian people. To that extent, the policy of the French nation is hostile to the Syrian people. This state will be its enemy. This hostility will end when the French state will change policy. There will be repercussions, negative of course, for the French interest. Now, evidently, the whole interview will be in the Figaro, the digital part of it. So we don't have it at the time, but this is part of the interview here. And we have a very nice picture here of the French leader François Hollande and various other of his associates. Some would perhaps say cronies. But the fact of the matter is that 2/3 of the French people do not support this action, and they are debating the action in the French Parliament. Thus, we will wait and see what is the outcome of the action there in France. Another commentator was on here, Jerry Pippin, that was holding out hope for the French. The French people would be ill-advised to take on this field responsibility on them. It is not a place where they should be. It is very unfortunate. Now we'll cover this from the other side. This is the Telegraph of London and their story on the el-Assad interview here with Le Figaro and their take. What we try to do is get to the original source as much as we can, and we'll of course continue to cover the story from Le Figaro and move with the French translation. Nonetheless, the Syrian president issued a dire warning. This is from the Telegraph of London, that any Western military intervention could lead to a regional war that would harm the interests of France. Whoever accuses must provide proof. We have challenged the United States and France to provide the slightest proof. He goes on to say here, Presidents Obama and Julian have been incapable of doing so, even to their own people. He questioned the logic of the claim that his forces carried out the 21st of August attacks, and he goes on to say here, supposing our armies wish to use weapons of mass destruction, it's possible that we do it in a zone that is located and where our soldiers were wounded, and this is verified by UN that visited the medical centers. The Syrian leader then ratcheted up pressure on France to stay clear of military action 2 days ahead of their national debate. 2/3, as we mentioned before, are against participating, according to a poll on Saturday. President el-Assad said whoever contributes to financial and militarily to bolstering the terrorists is an enemy of the American people. Of the Syrian people. The Assad regime asked the United Nations to stop the U.S. from taking military action against Syria, claiming it wanted help in achieving a political solution to the civil war. The U.S., meanwhile, must play its role as a peace sponsor rather than a state that uses force against whoever opposes its policy. More than 100,000 people are believed to have been killed in this civil war, and it is a civil war in Syria. And it's been going on now roughly for 2 years, and it will continue to go on. This is what most people have to understand. No matter what so-called military action the Obama administration and various other cronies take, it will continue to have a civil war in Libya. That will be the fate of Syria. In Libya, the civil war is still going on also. Let me just switch here, and we'll go to the NSA and Brazil and Mexico and the spine there. Vodafone. We'll go to them. They have made the biggest deal in decades with the American carrier Verizon. And that has been part of their stratagem here to continue on. And I'm going to have to switch here because what has happened here, a lot of these news outlets now have subscription service, which in itself is a little bit different, but let's we'll go to the Brazilian Mexican spy story here, and this is from the Reuters service. and it's not helpful. The National Security Agency spied on emails, phone calls, and text messages of the President of Brazil and Mexico. Brazilian news agency reported the revelation that could strain Washington relations with two of the nations in the Americas. Giboa news program, Fantastica, was based on documents that the journalist, again, this is Gene Griswold, obtained from Mr. Edward Snowden. And of course, he lives in Rio de Janeiro. Fantastico showed that it said was it is a slide displaying the passages of written messages by the Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, who was still a candidate at the time. In the message, Peña Nieto discussed who he was considering naming as his ministers once elected. A separate slide displayed communication patterns between the Brazilian President Damas Georges and her top advisors. Fantastico said, although no Pacific was there, both slides were part of the NSA's case study showing how data can be intelligently filtered by the agency's secret internet surveillance program. We've been made aware of those. Were discovered in a trawl of documents leaked by Mr. Snowden. The Brazilian government's already smarting from earlier reports. The NSA spied on the emails and phone calls of Brazilians and called in the ambassador Thomas Shannon to explain the new allegations. The Justice Minister there, Jose Cardoso, said the contents of documents, if confirmed, should be considered very serious and constitute a clear violation of Brazilian sovereignty. This spying hit not only Brazil, but the sovereigns of several nations that have been violated in a way totally contrary to international law establishments. And that's what he told Gabon, the newspaper. Cardoso traveled last week to Washington, met with the Vice President Biden and others, seeking more details on previous seemingly less serious disclosures by Mr. Snowden on spying in Brazil. Russell held a cabinet meeting on Monday that included the nation's defense, justice, communication, and foreign affairs ministers to discuss response to the espionage report. A presidential spokesman would not comment on the new allegations. We value our relationship with Brazil and understand that they have various concerns about these disclosures, and we will continue to engage with the Brazilian government in the effort to address these concerns. That's a spokesman from the U.S. Embassy. Brazil and the U.S. are global partners, and we agree that our broader relations will remain vital in moving forward. The Mexican presidential palace had no immediate comment in July after initial reports of NSA surveillance in the Latin American nations. Peña Nieto said it would be totally unacceptable. The U.S. is hoping to sell Brazil these 36 F-18 fighter jets, but the Brazilian government officials said manufacturer Boeing's chances of landing the more than $4 billion deal have been set back, and they should go look elsewhere. And one of the things to remember, all of these things have economic as well as political implications. And in a global economy, these implications determine which countries and their companies, enterprises, private enterprises like Boeing, get the deals or don't get the deals. So that in itself is a situation that they will have to live with. Carl Meacham, head of the Americas program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, believes Brazil has more to lose than the U.S. Well, that's his belief. But Brazil, their economy is actually doing better than the U.S. economy, and they have allied themselves with Russia and various other people. They are having the World Cup there, and of course the Olympics. So they're rolling right along as a nation that is, I guess, what we call forward-looking in their particular situation. The headline here in Reuters is the Obama authorization. Where is lawmakers? It's going all around on this in the U.S. body politic. And there's some talk of rewriting it in at least the Senate of the U.S. there, and this has been a long situation. The Democrat Robert Menendez, he is from New Jersey. He chairs something called the Foreign Relations Committee, and with the leader of the Senate, who is Harry Reid, were conferring today about what to do about this issue. And it's a very complicated situation for the Americans. As we've spoken here before, it's a situation that is out of the American foreign policy of an American president named Woodrow Wilson, a segregationist, a racist. They're the man that literally segregated the workforce in the U.S. government. And from Jim McGovern from the Bay State, Massachusetts here, the resolution that they are presenting right now is open-ended. I think that every people who are sympathetic to the administration might have trouble, supporting it. The broad authority the president asked for in creating lots of concern with me and others. This is from a senator from Missouri named Roy Blunt. They presented a classified briefing to the senators on Sunday. So thus these assurances are out there, but people are very, very skeptical, even within the president's own party. One of the leaders in the American House of Representatives, their lower house, that had 435 members, Chris Van Hollen, he's from the state of Maryland, says he wants the authorization to spell out no U.S. forces will be sent to Syria. Well, there's a problem there in the definition of U.S. forces. There are U.S. forces, many have been verified on the ground. These are part of the CIA's paramilitary operations, which are secret, but nonetheless they're there. And this is one thing to remember. In Syria, there are various intelligence agencies, the CIA, NSA types, the French, the UK, the Mossad are all operating there. And all of these people have their agents, paramilitaries, freelancers, you name it, they're all in the Syrian state. And that is something that has not been talked about. What President Obama is talking about is and quote here, the president is authorized to use the armed forces of the United States as he determines to be necessary and appropriate, which would use authorization for ground troops should the president decide they are necessary and appropriate. This is from Goldsmith here. Said the authorization is drafted by the president, could let him use elements of the armed forces there. So in other words, this is a one of those open-ended things. This Jack Goldsmith, incidentally, is at Harvard. He's a law professor at Harvard University. He was a top Justice Department official in the G.W. Bush administration. So this is something that is going to go on, but in legal niceties really is not the issue here. The issue here is the proof of the WND. And as we were stated on a previous program, if you believe the so-called verifiers of this, which they claim are first responders, they're not really first responders. They are these so-called rebel gangs and what the Syrian government call them terrorists. And they're closely aligned, so on the BBC, with the Saudi Arabia and these various Arab embassies who are putting in billions of dollars, and those arms are coming across the border via Turkey. And also they're getting all kinds of technical assistance. So they have rockets, they have what's normally called delivery systems, they have these. So be very, very careful about when you talk about they're only getting what used to be called many years ago C rations about to expire. That is not the case. That is a smoke screen that is put up. So this is a very serious situation. It is more intensely internationalized than the previous adventures of G.W. Bush. Now, G.W. was able to get together a coalition, quote-unquote, of the willing, cronies like the UK, Canada, Australia. Those people contribute very little in a military sense. Even France, very little there, name only. But there has become a time in the American foreign policy that this old Wilsonian policy, Woodrow Wilson, has to end. It's a racist policy, and that is all that they are perpetuating. Now, here's where the situation is also very, very a treacherous situation, in that the U.S. is a nation that has severe budget constraints. They have something here called sequester. Is an austerity program. It'll be revisited, and also their deficit will be revisited. So it puts limits on the military in terms of literally how much money they can spend on various operations. And when you go into something of this nature, even say, for instance, if you decide, well, we're going to bomb for 3 or 4 days, well, perhaps they would and send cruise missiles, but the total cost of that, it would be billions of dollars. Now, if the war widens, as President el-Assad says, into, say, Lebanon and into Israel and into various other countries, Jordan, etc., then you're talking about, with the U.S., $1 trillion war. What does $1 trillion war mean to the American budget? It would blow it into 50,000 pieces. The U.S. cannot sustain that type of debt. Now, that is the issue. People can talk about this morality, which is nothing but pity moralizing, all they want. But the budget is an analytical document. It's based upon material facts. And the fact of the matter is the U.S. literally just does not have the money to prosecute a long, drawn-out affair. Now, what I mean by that is an affair that would have, say, boots on the ground, and they would be there 3, 6 months, a year. They cannot do this. They can do very short things, but again, these conflicts are not controlled by the people that necessarily start them. They found that out in Vietnam. They found that out in Afghanistan. They found that out in the Baghdad War that cost $1 trillion. And what did the U.S. get out of it? Nothing. And that was the same proverbial argument that they had, that this was a crusade to find WND. They claimed that the late President Saddam Hussein, who was assassinated basically, had. And he did not have those. And they called that a moral campaign. Moral campaigns have been used in the U.S. to justify everything from chattel slavery to disenfranchisement of people to brutalization of people and various other things. So it is to be suspected as the last and distant thing of a scandal. But the people of the world have woke up to that. That's why 2/3 of the French people oppose it. 60% of the American people oppose it. So what can these people do? Well, they can run to the Congresses, and that's what they'll do here. We heard from the Senator McCain. He was a candidate in 2008 for the presidency, and he sort of moved around it, vacillated from one side of the position to another side of the position, with obviously no position other than to say, well, it would be a terrible thing if President Obama were turned down. Well, it has to be more than if just President Obama is rejected. What it has to be is a starting of a new foreign policy. The Secretary Kerry came out with these principles, but these are old principles. They're not being accepted. Now, the reality of the situation is, if the Congress of the U.S. does pass this, and a majority of American people oppose it, the consequences for elections coming up in 2014 and 2016 will be very serious. They will continue on, especially if the war widens. This is what happened in the U.S. in 2008. There was a candidate named Hillary the Monster Clinton. She was running against the now President Barack Obama, and he ran as the anti-war candidate, and she was defeated. Now, she is contemplating running in 2016, but if this thing is approved and escalates, it'll be a no-starter. She will not run. So that will change the whole dynamic of the American political system. Let's wrap it up here with the Verizon Communication and Vodafone. Agreed to pay $130 billion to Vodafone for its U.S. wireless business. Now, this is the third largest corporate deal in the world. It is in cash stock of Verizon's full access to profits from the U.S. largest mobile operation. For the British group, the accord will allow to return 71% of net proceeds, $84 billion there. The deal in which Verizon buys Vodafone's 45% in the Verizon Wireless. Now, the Verizon organization has both landlines and wireless lines, so it will change somewhat, and this will be a deal that is totally different. The deal will become the third largest announced deal in the world after Vodafone $203 billion takeover of Massaman, that's the German's Massaman, in 1999, and the AOL acquisition of Time Warner, that was $181 billion the following year. That would have been in 2000. Verizon's also managed to raise one of the largest ever financial packages, $60 billion. So this is a very big deal. When we look at other things that happen in this mobile sector here, other people that have consolidated here, we have the SoftBank Corporation of Japan. They've taken control of Sprint. Nextel, Sprint bought Nextel, and it's a number 3 provider. So number 3 and number 1 are now going through different bases here. Vodafone, let's see, will lose its best asset. It will get a war chest to reward stockholders, what it's all about. And Vodafone also spent £6.3 million on investments in the network. So nonetheless, they'll come out of this, and Barclays and Bank of America, that's Merrill Lynch, acted as the financial advisors, which mean they get a big piece, and they're also underwriting $61 billion in financing for the bid, and then J.P. Morgan, the same characters that are always usually here, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, UBS, they advised Vodafone. So, thus, all these banks are involved in this deal. They stand to make millions on the deal, and that affects the world's calling public. because of in the U.S. and in the UK and across the world that these people operate on. These are some of the news items that come across the old global news business today. And in the U.S., it is a holiday that is called Labor Day. But nonetheless, we have laborers striking last week from the lower-end fast food operation, period. And from India, the parliament passes cheap food law for 800 million people. Remember, India has 1 billion people, and 800 million will get, quote-unquote, what's called cheap food. We'll just cover this. Comes from the Reuters. The Indian Upper House of Parliament approved a $20 billion scheme to distribute subsidized wheat and rice to 80 billion people. Not unusual in the U.S. We have what's called price supports. It's called the Food Security Bill. And the Congress Party is behind it and is preparing for May elections of next year. This is Bostonred for BR on the World. Good day and have a peaceful week. We'll reappear, I believe, tomorrow and Thursday in this time slot.